Good evening. It's a pleasure to welcome everyone to the event tonight. My name is Alan Spate. I'm director of the Institute for Philosophy and Religion here at Boston University. Tonight's lecture represents a significant collaboration between two interdisciplinary programs with long histories at BU. The first, the Institute of Philosophy and Religion, or IPR, recently turned 40 years old and has had a long-standing interest in issues at the intersection of philosophy, religion, and public life. It is this year hosting a series of talks on the general theme of toleration and freedom in a global age. The second, the Institute on Culture, Religion, and World Affairs, or CURA, has for 25 years brought a social science expertise to the exploration of religious traditions, especially in the Islamic world. On behalf of both of our programs, we're delighted to have Professor Ramadan with us tonight. Before we introduce him, I'd like to say a few words about events in our continuing series. In the next 2 weeks in the IPR series on toleration, we'll be hearing from experts on specifically American approaches to the large questions of toleration. David Hall from the Harvard Divinity School will speak next week on Wednesday, October 20th. The time for that is 6 p.m., a little later than this evening. The following Wednesday, October 27th at 5 p.m., Noah Feldman from the Harvard Law School will speak. And the week following, Ian Baruma, who will be talking about toleration on 3 continents, will be here. That's November 3rd. For more information on all our programs in the 2 institutes, be sure to check our websites, bu.edu/IPR and bu.edu/CURA. If you'd like a brochure, you can find them on the table outside, as well as sign-up sheets for our listserv and email list. I also want to mention that tonight, after the lecture and question period, Professor Ramadan will be signing copies of his newest book, available, so far as I understand, only here yet in the United States, although it's been available in the UK for a couple of weeks. The book is entitled The Quest for Meaning, Developing a Philosophy of Pluralism. There will be copies available in the lobby, and Professor Ramadan will be available to sign them. I've asked my colleague Bob Hefner, the director of the CURA program and professor of anthropology here at BU, to introduce Professor Ramadan. Bob is author or editor of some 15 books, including a volume of the forthcoming New Cambridge History of Islam devoted to Muslims and modernity. He has directed some 15 major research projects and organized 11 international conferences on a wide range of topics, including the culture and politics of Muslim education and the prospects for civil democratic Muslim politics. Bob?
I want to thank everyone for coming this evening to, I think, this rare and special event. Introducing some speakers is challenging because an audience knows so little about them that a host has to paint the broad stroke too quickly. In other instances, the challenge of introduction lies less in too little but too much being known about a speaker, or what is known being clouded by controversy. I suspect that most people in this room can appreciate that the challenge for introducing our speaker tonight is of the latter, too much known, too cloudy sort. I'll also, however, surprise no one if I begin by saying that Professor Tariq Ramadan is one of the most influential, original, and important public intellectuals in the world, not just Muslim public intellectuals, but public intellectuals. If you go online and do a short search, you'll see that in 2009, Foreign Policy magazine, an always lively web and print source, ranked Professor Ramadan as 49th in its list of the world's 100 most influential public intellectuals. That's a little low by my estimation, but I think you get the point. Born in August 1962 in Geneva, Switzerland, Professor Ramadan is currently Professor of Contemporary Islamic Studies in the Faculty of Oriental Studies at Oxford University in the UK. Ramadan is also the grandson of Hassan al-Banna, the Egyptian scholar and activist who founded the Muslim Brotherhood in 1928. Ramadan's father, Saeed Ramadan, was also active in the Brotherhood and was exiled from Egypt to Switzerland, where Ramadan was born. Professor Ramadan holds a PhD in Arabic and Islamic Studies from the University of Geneva, where, among other things, he wrote a dissertation that I believe, he can correct me on this, was concerned with Friedrich Nietzsche scholarship. He also studied the Islamic sciences at Al-Azhar University in Cairo, Egypt. Ramadan is president of the Euro-Muslim Network, based in Brussels. He's also an advisor to the European Union on religious affairs, and since 2005 has at various times worked on task forces in the United Kingdom on religious and Islamic affairs. His books have been translated into dozens of languages. In the part of the world, it's a rather remote part of the Muslim world, but a part of the world where I've worked for some 30 years, Malaysia and Indonesia, he's also one of the most widely read and respected Muslim thinkers. Indeed, earlier this year, I was supposed to meet him at a conference in Singapore, which regrettably I had to withdraw from because of conflicts, but that makes this meeting all the more special for me. Professor Ramadan has been barred from several Arab-majority countries, including Tunisia, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia, for criticizing their governments on questions of democracy and human rights. Many American non-specialists of Islam may not know much about Tariq Ramadan, but they may have heard that he's had banning difficulties in the United States as well. In 2004, Ramadan was offered a tenured loose professorship of religion, conflict, and peace building at the Kroc Institute with my colleague and friend Scott Appleby at Notre Dame University in South Bend, Indiana. But a visa earlier issued to him for the position was revoked later in that year, 2004. There followed a series of suits, appeals, and court rulings, all of which were finally resolved on January 20th of this year, when an instruction signed by Secretary of State Hillary Clinton lifted the travel ban. In the eyes of many observers, the earlier decision to bar Ramadan from the United States, though allegedly based on contributions that he had given to Palestinian aid groups, was probably prompted by irritation some administration insiders had felt with regard to Ramadan's expressed views on U.S. foreign policy. Now, at the risk of sounding like a hopeless ivory tower scholar of Islam, I should point out that none among these florid events figured in Alan Spate and my own efforts to bring Professor Ramadan to Boston University for this lecture tonight. For their some 70 years of combined existence, the Institute on Philosophy and Religion and the Institute on Culture, Religion, and World Affairs at Boston University have been interested in, among other things, but very much centrally among the things we're interested in, with the ways in which religious scholars, believing scholars, practicing scholars reach deep into their respective traditions to confront the challenges and circumstances of the modern age. As recent efforts to carve out Muslim-free zones in the United States have sadly, and I think shockingly, illustrated, the most serious among these challenges have often to do with the question of how to live together respectfully under the fluid yet participatory conditions of democratic societies. It's in this last regard, the question of how to live together under the conditions of modernity's porous pluralism, that Ramadan stands out as a globally important figure. He is, I would insist, not merely a Muslim public intellectual, but a Western public intellectual who also happens to be seriously Muslim. Sometimes wrongly accused of doublespeak, and I think it's thoroughly wrong. Let me be clear about that. What is so exceptional about Ramadan's work is that it digs deep and simultaneously into two traditions, those of Western democratic philosophy on one hand, and those of the Islamic sciences, not least of all fiqh, or jurisprudence, and kalam, theology, on the other. This is not doublespeak, but a reflexive hermeneutic, much needed if we're to speak across rather than within the pluralized ethical horizons of our age. Over the years, I've read many Ramadan books, and I've listened to several dozen tapes and interviews. What I find most remarkable about the man, and there are many things that I find remarkable, is that contrary to the media critics' claims, the care and consistency with which he has developed his arguments over a 20-year period. His writings and his activism are important because they contribute not just to the revitalization of global Muslim scholarship on questions of public interaction, but to a deeper thinking through of problems of pluralism in Western democratic theory and practice. So in sum, I would ask you to join me in extending a warm welcome this evening to Professor Ramadan. Let us welcome him as a scholar of Islam, but also as a scholar of Western democracy. This is to say, let us welcome him as an intellectual in a West where he will be, and hopefully, and certainly should be regarded, not as the Muslim other, but as a respected public scholar and fellow citizen, speaking to the challenges we together face. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this invitation here and this. I'm very impressed by this introduction, and I want to thank you not only for the words, but for the substance of what you tried to translate about my work, because I felt that this was exactly it, that you got the essence of what I have been trying to do over the last 25 years, and for that, it's not usual that I find people reading and being able to express it in the way you did. So for that, thank you, and thank you for being here this evening. I'm very happy to be in this university and to come to talk about a topic which is so important for all of us, from within the Islamic tradition, but also as human beings facing contemporary challenges. And it's high time to look at the reality of our societies and understanding that if we carry on being driven by emotional politics and by populist trends and by politicians that are nurturing and instrumentalizing fears, we are going to lose the very essence of tolerance or respect, or the very essence of the principles helping us to live together. So what I am going to do is really, as the topic was from an Islamic perspective, is to start from within. So I want to ask you to come along a journey from within the Islamic tradition, how in the Islamic tradition the concept of toleration and tolerance and respect is understood and perceived and translated into the classical tradition and the text, the scriptural sources, but not to end up with this understanding, to go beyond that and to ask ourselves at the end of the day, in our living together, how can we go beyond that and understand what are the common principles and understanding that we can share in our society today, because I really think that this is where we have to go. It's really understanding from within our tradition or the tradition of the other, and then coming to some of the principles and some of the objectives on which we can agree. So as an introduction, 3 main points that I want to highlight. In our discussion today, not only in the media or in the public sphere, but even sometimes within academia, when it comes to talk about Islam, it's as if Islam per se has a problem with diversity and pluralism. It's as if the perception of Islam is problematic. So we tend to essentialize Islam by first understanding that Islam, because Islam is relying on one book understood as the very word of God, it means that it's a monolithic reality, and all the Muslims, because the text is one, are going to have the same vision, while it's first completely wrong, and Islam is as complex as Christianity, and Islamic trends are as diverse as the Christian or Jewish or Buddhist trends. If you come from within, you understand that you may have the same principles of the same sets of text, but the interpretations are different and the understandings are diverse. So the first thing is really to step back and to get this first intellectual attitude that we are dealing with a universe which is a universe of reference full of diversity, understandings, and interpretations, and it's not only one Islamic understanding. So I'm not representing here all the Muslims and what Islam is, but it's one take on this tradition that is disputed even from within the Islamic tradition. So as a Muslim scholar, I'm dealing with other Muslim scholars, and it's not always easy. And by the way, sometimes it's easier to talk to non-Muslims than to talk to other Muslim scholars, as you know. So this is one thing. The second thing is, if we want to come to a better understanding of what Islam or some trends within Islam are saying about the concept of tolerance and respect, because I will come to this, it's important to come back to the fundamentals and some of the texts that we can find and get a sense of the global message. So this is the overall message. So this is why I want to do tonight, is to start with this, to start with the principles, and then to get to these discussions that we have and the different trends. And the last thing which is important is, once again, it's not to come to talk about tolerance and the theoretical framework and concepts only as philosophical concepts. Of course, we have to talk about philosophy, we have to talk about these concepts, but at the end of the day, if we are serious about pluralism, if we are serious about the future of our societies, and you listen to what is said today, not only in Europe, because today I live in countries where it's very worrying. It's very worrying. It's, you know, tolerance and toleration and respect and living together, they are not theoretical discussion now or concepts that we can just discuss in such a way. It has to do with our daily life. When we see that populist parties today are so successful to shape the landscape of the political discussions. And as I have been repeating over the last 10 days of my visit in the States, I thought that the United States of America were protected from that. And over the last few months, it's quite clear that behind the scene, you have had a revealing process on the discussion of the community center in New York, on the burning of Quran Day, that fear and rejection and mistrust are part of what is the reality of the American society together. And it's worrying. So we are dealing here with a discussion which has practical impact in our lives. So it's really practical philosophy, that it's how do we translate the concepts into our daily life. And this is where I think that there is a connection between the academic discussion and our daily life as citizens and trying to build pluralistic society. And this is where I'm here, not here just to talk about concepts and idealistic visions, but really how do we translate this into reality. So I will end with some views on that. So let me start with the fundamentals and something which is very necessary in our discussion. Why I'm saying this, because you know, over the last 20 years, being involved in discussions in the West, very often I'm asked about Islam perceived as a problem, you know, with secularism, with violence, with women, and we end up talking about what Islam is not and what are the problems, and not to come to the principles. So I want you to do exactly the opposite with me today. It's just what Islam is saying and what kind of verses and references we find that are also shaping the Muslim minds and the Muslim tradition before the Muslim minds, and then, of course, the understanding. If we come to the text, there is something which is, if you go crossing the board from the Sunni and the Shia tradition, and within the Sunni tradition or the Shia tradition, whatever is the trend, and by the way, it's not only two trends, the bad and the good Muslims. So this is a colonizing way of dealing with the Islamic reality. We got that under colonization. There are the good and the bad Muslims. The good are with us and the bad are against. And then we have now this binary vision. All the Bush rhetoric was based on that, the good and the bad. You are either with us or against us. So my answer to this, no, I'm sorry, I'm against the people who killed in New York, but I'm against your policy. So I'm against both. So it's not either or. But here we have this understanding here that crossing the board, you will find something which is the essential principle of Islam, And it's important to start with this, which is the oneness of God, called the Tawheed. Why I'm starting with this? Because the oneness of God is the principle connected to the oneness of humanity. And with the oneness of humanity that we have in the Islamic tradition, there is one verse that is always quoted, and we can find it, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. We give dignity to human beings. So the first status here, which is important because it's the equal reality in the dignity of human being beyond the fact that you are Christian, Jew, or Muslim, or it's the dignity of the human being. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ is just human beings are specified here out of their dignity. And this is something which is coming with the relationship with the one God. The oneness of God, the oneness of humanity, and the dignity of every single human being. We should start with this because behind the discussion about tolerance is not only do you tolerate me, but what do you think about my humanity? The fact that I am a human being. Am I more or less a human being than what you think? And you will see that all the discussion that we had on the colonization, implicitly we had this discussion about the status of the other as a human being or not. And I can tell you something that sometimes when I listen to some of the media coverage about the fact that Afghani people or Iraqi people are killed, it's as if their blood has less value than our blood as American or as European. And behind the discussion is, do you give the same value to the human being we are talking about, beyond the fact that they are from Pakistan or they are from Afghanistan? It's a serious matter when we come to this. Behind the discussion, now we are facing something which was just unbelievable with the flood in Pakistan, where people were explaining why there is no such a mobilization to come to support the Pakistani people, because the perception is that the Pakistani people are supportive of the Taliban Muslim extremists. So to help them, it's as if the fact that they are perceived as such is diminishing their status as human beings. Think about it, because it's a serious question here on the philosophical ground is, how do you deal with the people? So the starting point of the Islamic tradition is to say, one humanity equal in dignity. So this is the problem, the first principle. But there is another principle that we find also as one of the signs of God. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ, we find that in the Quran, خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. He created out of you a spouse. It could be a man and a woman. It's not a woman for the man. We don't have this in the Islamic tradition. The rooted tradition is not that. Is he created out of you the other. So a woman for a man and a man for a woman, according to the Islamic tradition, in order for you to find peace. And he created between you love and mercy. And this is the first dimension of diversity. And it's based not on only the recognition of the other human being, but with the principle, the feeling. And this is something which is important. You are not going to solve the problem of toleration only on principle. You should understand that there is something which has to do with the rule and the feeling, because sometimes a law that is saying that we are equal before law could be misinterpreted or enforced in a way which is not really equal because of the feeling and the mistrust that you have towards people. So here there is something in this verse that is referring to something which is connecting you to the other. Two things. Love as for your quality, and mercy as to bearing your weaknesses. So this is something which is important. And by the way, it's always good to get this when you are married and when you are with a wife or a husband. Just love him or her out of his or her qualities and show mercy for his or her weaknesses. That's a good way to keep your couple united. But this is principles and feeling and spirituality. So it starts with this, and then you come to a second stage coming from the Quran, helping us to get a better sense of what is God's will with his creation. And there is something here that is very often quoted by the Muslims. And it's important not only to quote it, but to understand it. وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَجَعَلَكُمْ أُمَّةً وَحْدًا. If God had willed, he would have made you one community. It's a very important verse because it means that from the very beginning, God's will is not for us to be all the same. There is nothing in God's will, according to Islam, which is imposing uniformity. You may hope to get unity, but you should understand that it's God's will to have diversity. If He had willed, you would be one community. And here, it's important to come with the understanding that it's not only because, once I was referring to this verse, and someone said, yes, but it's about diversity in colors and races, because there is also in the Quran, اختلاف ألسنتكم وألوانكم, that there is a diversity of colors and languages. So he was saying, yes, in Islam you accept the fact that there is a diversity of colors and culture, but not the diversity of religions, which is wrong. Other verses, وَلَوْ شَاءَ رَبُّكَ لَآمَنَ مَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ كُلُّهُمْ جَمِيعًا أَفَأَنْتَ تُكْرِهُ النَّاسَ حَتَّى يَكُونُوا مُؤْمِنِينَ. In Arabic, I translate, if your Lord, your educator, had willed, all the people on earth would have believed. Is it then to you to impose onto people to believe? Look at that. It's about religion here. So meaning by this that you have no power to impose onto people to believe. So it's a diversity in color, it's a diversity in culture, it's in diversity in religion. So, and meaning by this that the oneness of God with the oneness of humanity is based on God's will in what has to do with diversity. He wanted this diversity in every field, and religion, it's part of the whole understanding. So, why it's important? Because when we speak about tolerance, you may think we are talking about goodwill. But in fact, behind the concept of tolerance, there is a concept which is important, which is the concept of power. There is no tolerance without thinking about power, because it's really about, I may have the power to remove you from the picture, but I'm going to tolerate you, or to suffer your presence. I will come to this. But the point is this one, is that when you come to the principles, and this is sometimes what we have to say to Muslims, if you want to be heard by Muslims, is to refer to verses, say, look, this is what is written, is that this is God's will, that there is a diversity in all the dimensions, cultural, religious, and also in the way the people believe or not. Adding to this, because he wanted the people to believe or not to believe, you have no right to impose onto people to believe or not. You are not here to convert the people. And this is why we have in the second surah of the Quran, La ikraha fi din, no compulsion in religious matter. This is the general statement, which means that here we have to respect the freedom of the people. Does it mean that the Muslims in history always respected that? No. Of course, that sometimes they impose, they attack, of course, Muslims are human beings, and it happened in situations that they acted in contradiction, as we have still now, that in some, Muslim majority countries, for some minorities or religious minorities, they cannot even, practice their religion. And we have to be self-critical on saying, how come we are talking about religious freedom? We come to the States, we ask for our rights, and in Muslim majority countries, we are facing some discriminations, and no one can deny that there are discriminations towards some Christians in some country, and even I was critical of this, and this was in a book that I wrote with a Christian professor 20 years ago on what is happening in Saudi Arabia. When you have a government asking Christians to come to work and telling them that we don't want to see you praying, and we don't want a church, and we don't want to see anything. And we speak about diversity. So this is a discrepancy. This is something which is problematic in the way, and this is why we have to be critical, and this is where the text could help us to come to a better understanding. But now, this diversity is a reality, and this is God's will coming from the text. But with diversity, there is another dimension which is important, because diversity could be an asset, but it could be a problem. How do we deal with this diversity? It would be more simple for all of us to be the same, or to live with the same religion. And this is where you have something which is another set of verses that are quite interesting for us to understand the concept of tolerance in Islam, which has to do with the relationship between groups. وَلَوْلَا دَفْعُ اللَّهِ النَّاسَ بَعْضَهُمْ بِبَعْضٍ لَفَسَدَتِ الْأَرْضِ. If God has not put a set of people against a set of others, the earth would have been corrupt. Meaning by this, that this diversity is not only his will, but is the necessity for you to keep the earth safe. Absolute power among human beings is the corruption of the earth. So this is why we have balance of power. And tolerance and toleration has to do with balancing. It has to do with this. So this is where we have a verse telling us diversity is a richness, but it's a risk of conflict. And balancing power is the only way for human beings not to be arrogant, oppressive, or to try to take over. This is why we need to balance power, and it is the only way to get a sense of the very meaning of tolerance and toleration amongst us. And there is another verse, and once again, look, it's not only about power, it's also about religions that we have the same verse. وَلَوْلَا دَفْعُ اللَّهِ النَّاسَ بَعْضَهُمْ بِبَعْضٍ لَهُدِّمَتْ صَوَامِعُ وَبِيَعٌ وَصَلَوَاتٌ وَمَسَاجِدُ يُذْكَرُ فِيهَا اسْمُ اللَّهِ كَثِيرًا. This is another verse which is important, saying to the Muslims, if we didn't have a set of people balancing the power of the other, synagogues, mosques, churches, and places of worship would have been destroyed. Meaning by this that this diversity has also to do with religions as well, not only tribes and nations. So it has to do with a diversity of religion, for no religion should take over and have absolute power. You have this in the text. So it has to do with religious diversity as well. But here it's not a positive diversity, it's a diversity dealing with balancing power, because absolute power is dangerous. It's very dangerous. And this is where we have this understanding coming from the Islamic tradition. So here we are dealing with something which has to do with God's will, the diversity of people, this fact that you have to respect his will by respecting the diversity. You have no choice in saying something else. And this is why, from the very beginning, once when I started to talk 25 years ago, I was saying, you know what, in Islam, the concept of tolerance doesn't exist. I say, what? What are you saying? It means that you are imposing. I say, no, tolerance is not enough. You are giving you the right to say, I tolerate or not. But if you are serious with the text, there is no other way but to respect God's will in his diversity, the diversity he has created, and that we have to deal with this as the way you worship God is to respect his will, and meaning respecting this diversity, knowing that there will be competition, that there will be power struggle, but at the end of the day, you cannot impose your religion, you cannot convert, you cannot oppress the people for what they believe or what they think. So it's something which has to do with a step further than toleration. And we have it in another verse of the Quran. And it's very often, you know, when we have interfaith dialogue, the Muslims like to refer to this verse by saying, Ya ayyuhan nas, and this is something which is important. You have the three levels that I was mentioning. O people, we have created you from male and female, and we have made you nations and tribes in order for you to know each other. وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا, in order for you to know each other. And this is something which is essential here, is that God's will is to create this diversity of nations and tribes for one reason. And this is where you go to the risk of this diversity, to understanding diversity as a richness, knowledge of the other, in order for you to know each other. So this diversity is a risk of conflict, but it's an opportunity to go to knowledge. So the thing which is important here is, if you want to respect God's will in his creation and deal with others, there is only one way: mutual knowledge. Acknowledging the fact that they are and trying to understand who they are. And this is something which is very important, is the concept of not only passive toleration, but active mutual knowledge, to take and to give from you. And this is what is لِتَعَارَفُوا, the Arabic root of ta'arafu is on an equal footing. Ta'arafu is knowing each other on an equal footing. Meaning by this, that knowledge is helping you, mutual knowledge is helping you to go from potential power struggle to mutual equal recognition and respect. So this is why, for me, tolerance is problematic if we stop here, because You can tolerate someone or somebody or a community by ignoring them or him or her. But respect is a step beyond that, which is no respect without knowledge of the other. So it's you are, but I want to know who you are. I want to understand what you stand for. So it's something which is, in the Islamic tradition, important and dealt with knowledge. Now, this mutual knowledge, it's important because it sends back to you another very important, demanding contribution to this diversity. As much as you have to try to know the other, implicitly saying that you know yourself, and this is a very important point, very often in the West, my main problem is not with people, they don't know Islam, or they have to tolerate Islam not knowing enough about Islam, but it's very difficult for people to respect and to be open to other when they have such superficial knowledge about themselves. And I'm putting it a very simple way. When you don't know who you are going to be scared of who you are not. It's a very important reality. It has to do with psychology. Very difficult to tolerate the other if you understand that the presence of the other is threatening who you are. And the less you know about who you are, the more he is or she is a threat. And I think it's also a balance not of power, but of knowledge. That sometimes, when, for example, I had this discussion after the Pope's statement about, the roots of Europe being Greek and Christian, my answer to this is that it might be that Europe doesn't need a dialogue with Islam, but a dialogue with itself. Because to reduce the past in such a way, it just shows that he is so scared of the present that he is just reducing the past. Because anyone who is studying philosophy, architecture, arts, and sciences will know that Islam and the Islamic philosophers and scientists were part of the construction of the European mindset and identity and the West. So just to reduce this is just not right, scientifically speaking, but it reveals much more about the fears of today than about the reality of the past. So this is something here which is an important point. And let me just add to this something which is, okay, as to the other, it's about knowledge. But what about yourself? And this is where it's a very critical discussion that we have among Muslims. And you should understand that we don't agree on that. It's the very essence of what is my role towards the other when I have to know who he is or she is. What is my role? And there is a concept here which has to do with toleration, and we have to understand in which way it has to be understood, is the concept of da'wah. It's calling to Islam. And some were calling, preaching, is in a way which was really proselytizing. It's just we are trying to get the people to come into Islam, and this happened in history. But if you come to a very understanding here is what is your role before the people in this world? You are coming from a specific tradition, the Islamic tradition, you have a specific role. And this is where you come to a verse which is a very important one to understand the very meaning here. And then once again, it's a critical discussion. I'm not saying that I'm representing all the Muslim trends. Get me right. And I have lots of problems within the Muslim community on that. But when you listen to وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا لِتَكُونُوا شُهَدَاءَ عَلَى النَّاسِ وَيَكُونَ الرَّسُولُ عَلَيْكُمْ شَهِيدًا. We made you the nation of the middle path in order for you to bear witness to your message before people. And this is a very important point, is at the end of the day, if you come to what is the very meaning of da'wah, which is the way you have to deal with other, ud'u ila sabili rabbik, so call for to the way of your Lord, with what? With wisdom, with the al-maw'azatul hasana, with the good words, and in the best way. If you listen to the three things that are put in how you should be with the other is wisdom as to yourself, the substance of what you're saying should be good, and the way you are talking should be respectful. It's all about you. It's all about your attitude. And this is where you get the better sense of the other verse telling to the Muslims, look, at the end of the day, what you should be to the people is a witness. A witness means that you should show the people around you what your faith is doing with you and in which way you are a witness towards the other. So when you understand that your presence is not to convert, but to bear witness to your message, it sends two things. I need to know you, but I should be consistent with my own values. I should be the witness of what I believe. And this is something which is an attitude towards the others. And it's quite important in pluralistic society, is knowing you in order to respect you and being consistent with my values in order for you to know me better. And this is where we understand the very essence of one dimension of tolerance. If you go to Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, Muslim scholars, 12th century, and then you go also to the discussion with Averroes, or before them, al-Kindi, al-Farabi, that were very much influenced by the Greek tradition, or afterward within the Islamic tradition, with scholars like one of my teachers, who was a European Muslim scholar living in Europe, al-Shatibi, you will see that they were constructing a whole set of philosophical take on tolerance based on verses and saying this is the way it has to be. That at the end of the day, the only thing that you should be, the only attitude which is right from an Islamic viewpoint is to bear witness to your message before people. You cannot impose anything. That you have to respect the diversity. This is the way you respect God's will. So you have a whole set of values and principles coming out of this understanding. Once again, you have other Islamic trends, they don't get this understanding, and that's the internal debate that we have, and I will come to this also in the discussion about what we are experiencing from within. So what does it mean? If you look at all these teachings, and this is why sometimes I really want that the fellow Muslims that I am dealing with within the Muslim communities here in the West, but also in Muslim majority countries, but not only my fellow citizens should get a sense of what Islam is saying about that, because here we are touching the substance and not only the problems. It's the substance. How do we nurture a human being? How do we get the sense of what it means to have this dignity, to meet the requirements of this dignity? Is really, what does it mean? If first you acknowledge the fact that there is a diversity because it's God's will, that there is oneness of God means the oneness of humanity with the same, the common dignity that we have, that he wanted this diversity, that what we have to do is to know the other and to be the witness of your principles. You nurture something that in the last book, The Quest for Meaning, I'm really thinking that we are sharing this in many traditions. In the Jewish tradition, in the Christian tradition, in the Muslim tradition, but not only. In the Hindu tradition, the Buddhist tradition. And I can tell you that very often the people are romanticizing about the Buddhist tradition. You know, I went and I spent 6 weeks in India, and I spent time with the Dalai Lama, trying to wake up with him at 4 o'clock when I was listening to him reciting all these texts that he has to, someone who is very, very demanding with himself. And he was explaining to me that this demands on myself is the way to be open to the other. So there is no other way to, from a spiritual viewpoint, to work on yourself if you want to be open towards the other. But the less you are demanding with yourself, the more you are judging towards the other. This is something which is also coming from all the philosophies. But what I got out of his experience and what I got from priests in South America, for example, the liberation theologians that I met, is something which is common. At the end of the day, if you want to come on a serious discussion on toleration, ask yourself the 3 main features and conditions that are necessary in every single human being. The first one is humility. Humility means that you acknowledge the fact that you don't get it all, that you can learn from the other, that it's knowledge. It's I go to know you, I try to know you in order to get something out of you. And sometimes in America or in Europe, sometimes I have to say to my fellow citizens, please, do you really think that you can get something out of the Muslim presence in this country? Because at the end of the day, this is the true question. Is it a problem or could it be a gift? Or do you get a sense that this presence could be valuable for the future? What is the point of believing in pluralistic society if we see all the others have problems to your identity? No, I think that this is you should take from the other. You should be able, so humility is a very important dimension. Is before even being around the table is to be nurtured with this humility. I'm going to learn from you. I don't get it all. I may think that my religion is the truth, but I'm not the truth. Truth doesn't belong to me. I'm trying to belong to the truth. But I know that I don't get the whole truth. Very important intellectual attitude. And you know, if you go to all the philosophers, the starting point of Socrates, I know that I don't know everything. It's a very strong statement of intellectual humility, which is so much lost in the debate that we have. One of the main problems that I had with your previous president is sometimes a lack of intellectual humility and many other things. But let me just put it mildly. Second thing, which is important, as I was saying, humility means that I will know from you. The second thing, which has to do with bearing witness, is consistency. Consistency is to look at yourself and to understand that between your values and yourself, your own behavior, there is a gap. You are trying to reach your values, but you don't get them implemented in your daily life. We are all living with personal, intimate, and visible contradictions. Put it like this. We are trying to be witness, but our contradictions are lacks of consistency. And this is what also we have to deal with when we deal about pluralism. Very often you deal with Muslims, they compare the Islamic values with the Western behavior. I say, look at these people. And you should tell them, no, compare the like with the like. The Muslim behavior with the Western behavior. Not the Islamic values and the Western behavior. And I would say exactly the same in the West, that some people are coming and say, you know what, we have human rights, we have democracy, and look at these Muslims. And say, it might be that you have all these values, but the behavior and the policies are not always consistent. So this is on a collective ground, but on the personal ground, if we are serious about toleration, we have to come with the second feature, which is consistency. Critical thinking is coming from there. So for example, to be able to say, Islam is a great religion, but not all the Muslims are acting in a great way. They are not behaving at the level of what is required, and we should all be like this. If we want to be serious with toleration outside, let us be consistent within. This is a second thing. And the third dimension here, which is with all this, as it is a relationship, is respect. So this is why, for me, the concept of toleration from within the Islamic teaching can be understood as a step towards something which is beyond that, which is don't stop at tolerating people, but at respecting them. And respecting them means knowing them and being curious, showing curiosity towards who they are and what they stand for. So now, having said this as something which is part of the Islamic tradition, and when I'm saying this, don't think that I'm just trying with modern words. Any one of you, go back to the Islamic philosophy, from the discussion between Muslim scholars and Maimonides in Spain, but not only in Muslim-majority countries, you will find that this is part of the Islamic tradition. The problem is that very often the Muslims are ignoring their own tradition, and in the West we are not reading this. It's as if it's the neglected part of our history. You can get a PhD in philosophy in the West and you know nothing about anything which has to do with Asian philosophy or Islamic philosophy. I think it's not necessary. We have enough with the Western philosophy. But what about René Descartes reading Abu Hamid al-Ghazali and writing on the margin that the concept of doubt was very efficient? That is as if today now the concept of doubt is very Western. It's coming from us. I'm sorry. Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, the neglected figure, was talking about, in al-Munqidh min al-Daral, it's just how you are saved from the darkness. It's really talking about this, that the doubt as something which is helping you to get a humble faith. So to be at the same time full of faith, but intellectually humble. It has to do with this tradition as well, but it's neglected. I would say that be careful by listening to me. Don't think that I'm coming with, oh, you talk like this because you are completely one of us. I am one of you. But what I'm talking about here is also a tradition which is it's full of this discussion. So just to get to my point and to conclude here, because I really think that it would be good to have a discussion, is that with this, if we now come to the whole discussion on toleration and try to come to an understanding that why, for me, we should go beyond that and be critical on this discussion, but not neglecting the fact that it's a very important step and it's very important to get to a deep understanding of toleration. So I don't have time to go to all the Western traditions, but because there are many traditions dealing with toleration from within the West as well. It's not only one way. But if you look to what was said, for example, by Locke or by Voltaire, when they speak about le traité de la tolérance, for example, coming from Voltaire, or when the treatise on toleration that was written by Locke, you understand something, that they were not dealing at the level of, individual relationship. In fact, they were talking to power, saying to the power of that time, you should tolerate the diversity. So in fact, you understand here that the concept of tolerance is also connected to power, in which way you retain, you master, you control your power in order to give room for the other to be here. So and this is why the very essence, the very etymology of toleration is to endure, to suffer the presence of the other. So it's a way to master your power in order to give room to the... So I tolerate your presence even though I don't like who you are, and I suffer it or I endure it. And behind it, there is a position of power, if we take it at the literal level. So we have to go beyond that, and this is why they were starting to speak about tolerance, because they were speaking to power, to government, in the way they have to deal with this diversity, within the state or in relationship with the church. Because for some of them, the discussion between Locke and Hobbes is that, do we have to accept other religions or only one religion in the name of for the stability within the state? So this was the discussion that we have during the Enlightenment and before and after. But it's quite important for us to understand that in our discussion we should not remove and not forget to speak about power and power struggle and who has the power to set the rules and the scene, because even if we speak about the rules that are protecting our equality, sometimes some people have more power than others to interpret the rules. This is a very important point, and this is exactly what we are facing in many European countries. And even here, that people are saying, what the problem with the Muslims is that now they are accepting our rules because they are in minority. What if they become a majority? What is going to happen? And then even with the law that are changing in France, for years I have been listening to people saying, you Muslims, you are not going, you don't abide by the law. In fact, you want to change the common law. I say, we don't want to change the common law. We only want them to be equally enforced with all the citizens. And we ended up in 2004, even in my country, in Switzerland, people advocating in the name of the protection of the country, changing the law and reducing the space of freedom of expression and freedom of worship. For example, in France, they changed the law in 2004 by saying the headscarf should be banned from school. So they changed the law, not the Muslims. And they reduced the scope. In my country, 4 minarets. 4 minarets. And they ended up changing the constitution and voting for the constitution to ban the construction of the minarets. And you have to think about, it's not a question, it has to do with the power and the majority process, which is problematic when the democratic process are driven by populism, that we are forgetting the rules and we are using the law in order to impose things and not give enough freedom to the people. So, having said that, I think that this is for us very important to come to a discussion on tolerance. What do we mean by this? Are we talking really about on an equal footing, power against power and dignity with dignity. This is what we want, and it means that we are respecting, with something which should be nurturing before the discussion, our humility, our knowledge, our sense of respect and consistency, and then from within to do the work. So I will end with this, because it's all fine like this and say, okay, we can go, and from an Islamic perspective, what I have to do is really from within the Muslim communities to go to a better understanding of that. But it's very difficult, but this is the way. And this is why, for example, in many of the books that I have been writing, I'm just tackling issues from within. And what I'm advocating from within, in the name of consistency, is that the Muslims should go through a radical reform in the way they deal with the text and the way they deal with the societies. Because there is a great deal of contradictions in the way we are dealing. So we claim that we have values and principles and ethics, but very often the gap is wide. And look at what is happening in the majority of the Muslim countries, and especially the Muslim majority countries and the Arab countries, is that lack of freedom, no tolerance, no respect, and dictatorships. So this is on the political ground. But what about all the other fields where we really have to open up and to promote knowledge, because there will be no dimension of respect and mutual respect if you don't open up all the fields when it comes to, for example, arts, medicine, women. These are fields where the Muslims are promoting values but not coming to a deep understanding of the challenges of our time. And this is why we have to go to critical knowledge in order to get more consistency and also humility. Humility means what? That from within the Muslim majority countries, but also the Muslim communities, to get a sense that we should not be scared of what the West is producing. And respect doesn't mean that we take everything. I would say that the only right way to respect yourself and to respect the other is to take what you think is good, what is produced, which is important and good in technology, in arts, in culture. Take what is good from the other. But to do this, you have to know, and also to acknowledge the fact that there are successful stories in the other, history and memory. It means that you have to study, that you have to promote this knowledge and to take from the other. What is needed here is to stop getting this defensive attitude by Muslims, rejecting or essentializing the West, and not being able to be selective in what you take, or just to go through this experience of attraction-rejection. You know, in basic psychology, there is something that is known. Sometimes you feel yourself attracted by something, or someone, or money, or, you know, assets. So you feel that you are attracted, and your mind doesn't like that your heart or your emotions are attracted. So you end up with this very strange attitude, which is a bit schizophrenic, but psychologically understandable. You are attracted, and you don't like what is attracting you in that way. So there is a psychological attitude of attraction-rejection. So you reject what is full of attraction for you. Look at what is happening in many southern countries towards the West. Attraction and rejection. We like it because, yes, money, comfort, technology, and intellectually we don't like this attraction. And you find in the same people in the Muslim majority countries is attraction-rejection. It's psychologically understandable on an individual basis, but also on the collective basis. So this is where, if we want to go towards this more reasonable tolerance and mutual respect, we have to solve these problems from within. And I would say to end that for the West, and this is something which is so important for me, and this is what also I'm advocating in the last book, which is a step after this, which is really we need today in the West, with all the means that we have, to be serious about the knowledge of the other and to be serious with this respect and consistency and humility. And this is why I don't see another way to focus but to focus on education. And I would say that there are 4 disciplines on which we have to focus now in our schools. Because tell me what you teach your kids, I will know what future you are constructing. There is one thing which is important, and it's quite clear in all what I have been saying. We need to teach more history, a sense of history, memory, because we don't want to come again with the same mistakes, and just to get a sense with the complexity of history, it's so important. The second thing which is important is philosophy. And philosophy, I'm here, it's just to ask the questions why and how and what was given by other societies. And to stop, romanticizing and just speaking about China as only an economic agent of tomorrow, while it's a great civilization of the past that we have to study. China is something else than what we are talking about now. And I think it's just unbelievable, the lack of understanding that we got of, Confucianism and Buddhism and Hinduism. Very, very superficial thing on philosophy. And even in the Islamic and Western philosophy, I'm talking to some people, they don't know anything about the Western philosophy. Some very, very superficial thought. For example, on toleration, it's just a huge chapter, so deep. The third thing is religions. And I'm not saying about catechism, I'm saying about knowing about, if we are serious about pluralistic society with different religious backgrounds living together, you need to know about religions, at least the fundamentals. And if you are, born Christian and you decide that Christianity is wrong, at least know why. Yeah. At least say something about why you think it's wrong. Because to be ignorant and to think that you are free, it's a contradiction in term. Your ignorance is a prison. It's a jail per se. So this is why in our schools, in our academia, discussion on religions at an academic level or in the civil society is so important to have a minimum of knowledge to let the people being free. And the last thing which is so important for me with history, philosophy, and religion is to teach more about arts. Why? Because there is something which is, when you are getting a sense of creativity in the other civilization, you get a sense of what is beauty and what is hope. And you end up loving the people with whom you share hopes, if you understand taste. And this is something which is so important. It's not all about philosophy and rules and thoughts. It's also about taste. It's also about creativity. And I think that we are lacking this kind of creativity. The only thing that we are accepting, because it's a very easy way to deal with creativity, is food. Couscous, curry, that's fine, we get it. And movies, that's it. But I'm not joking, I'm joking. We are going to something which is, even with arts, a consumerist attitude. Passivity, it's just, oh, that's good, I like it, kebab is good. But on the point of arts is deep, it's really the taste. And I can't get a sense. How are you going to tolerate or to get this sense of respect if you don't get at the level where you share with the people something which has to do with their imagination, the imaginary, the hopes? And I would say, yes, I'm serious about this. You end up loving the people with whom you share hopes. And hopes is coming also from art and with all the other fields that I have tried to highlight this evening. Thank you.
Professor Ramadan has agreed to take questions. We'd like to ask that those of you who have questions, if you could come forward to the microphone here, both so that we can hear you and so that we can record the session for web posterity. So the floor is open. Please, I think wherever you are in the auditorium, please come forward to the microphone so that we can hear from you.
Thank you very much for a most stimulating and indeed provocative exposition of the major issues. I do have a provocative comment in return. You have spoken, I think, with great eloquence on the subjects of interest and urgency to us all: humility, tolerance, knowledge, respect. These are virtues and these are values that we all wish to institute. But I have a problem with the way in which you have presented them. And to make matters somewhat simplified, I would like to argue that your exposition has been, for the most part, within the realm of intellectual history and within even the realm of a quasi-theology. The world doesn't work this way. All the great world religions have articulated as ideals respect, humility, knowledge, tolerance. All of them have done this. Yet there has been enormous discrepancies and differences in respect to the individual development of civilizations, whether East, West, Middle East, in all regions. Enormous differences. Well, how can it be then, if our major mode of analysis should be that of discourse and discussion of these ideas, that there has been such historical divergence? I would argue that your presentation has offered to us an analysis of what elites have been speaking about over history. But in fact, history is not made by elites alone. History is made by an interaction of elites with masses. And it is that interaction that you have left out, and you have left out that aspect, the concern of the masses. Well, how are states created? What is the dynamic behind the creation of states? For example, states that institute laws that we take as a universal, indeed impartial, across gender, across religion, across ethnicity, etc. There was nothing in that in your lecture on this subject. How do we create economies that are wealthy enough such that some classes have too much to lose, that they do not fight wars, that they in fact articulate even ideas of equality and toleration? They have too much to lose. That's an economic issue. How do we create...
That's a good question, but perhaps you could let him answer that,
Yeah,
Professor
okay,
Karlberg.
that's my main point anyway.
Thank you.
Can take 3 questions and I answer. Go ahead. I will take 3 questions and I will answer.
Okay. I think you've defended the faith, the religion of Islam very well, and I really liked your points about hope and the arts, but unfortunately, to take it to a more negative spin, I think that people aren't necessarily scared of the religion as much as they're scared of the people, the crazies or radicals, as you might call them, the ones that blow, shops up, terrorists, suicide bombers, and also the people that stand by, the moderate Muslims that stand by and allow the burning of an embassy over a cartoon. So I think that there should be a bigger discussion within the Muslim community that the West doesn't see, and that's where this negative, this pulling away comes from. And if the Muslim communities can't identify, their place in society where they want to be in the Western worlds, then you can't ask the West to tolerate them. If they don't know what they want from that experience, if a lot of these Muslims are in the Western countries just to make money and send it back home, or just to make money and leave, and they treat themselves as though they're outsiders, how do you expect the West to accept them? Thank you.
Thank you very much for everything that you said. I am at least a little bit familiar with some Islamic philosophy, and I really like what you said at the end about how education is the key to getting people to achieve something called respect. But from what I know, after having read some Al-Farabi, and to a lesser extent Avicenna, and maybe even Averroes, it seems to me like there's still a deep philosophical question as to whether or not all people can achieve the amount of self-knowledge required to come to true respect. Instead, most of these other philosophers, Al-Farabi most notably, will say something that most people can only achieve an image of true knowledge or an image of true philosophy. If that's the case, is it really possible for us to have this kind of respect on a global scale?
Okay. It's working. Can you hear me? Yes. I will try to go for... look, I don't know where I was. Yes, you were here. I had a topic. And the topic was really to speak about toleration also from an Islamic perspective. Now, if I had to add all these dimensions in the discussion, it would have been a course for 1 semester. Because I think that before coming to all what you are saying, because I think you are right, we need to speak about the economic forces that are preventing the people to implement the principles. But before, coming to why the people cannot implement and why they are not, why there are such discrepancies in the way we are dealing with our values. Why, for example, we speak about a democratic system and still when you look at what is happening within the society, we have so deep social problems that some citizens are less citizens than others. So you may speak about toleration on the ground, it's not happening. But before coming to this, I think that the theoretical framework of our understanding of the dignity should be part of the discussion. And it's not the elite. I think it's really important to get to a sense that sometimes we are so much involved in discussing why it doesn't work that we don't have the framework on which we rely to know what we want to achieve. So very often when I talk about Islam, some people, they think that as a Muslim, I cannot think what I think because Islam is preventing me to think the way I think. And if I think the way I think, it might be that I say something which is not really what I think. So if you can follow what I'm saying. So, but the point is, I'm upstream from the discussion. I'm not saying that what you are saying is not necessary. I'm saying let us first agree on the framework and understand what we are talking about. What is our understanding of human dignity, of mutual respect, and now come to a deep discussion. What on the ground is preventing us? So you can speak about the role of the state, but if you want me to speak about the role of the state preventing true mutual respect and toleration, it could take another lecture. We can speak about education, because our school system is problematic. We want a school system promoting equality, but we know, you as me, that depending on where you start school, depending on your social status, you will get another achievement or another status in the society. So schools are not rectifying the unbalanced reality within the society, but sometimes confirming it. So we have to speak about education. Now you want to speak about the economic forces. Yes, but before coming to these dimensions, let us first be clear on what are the principles that we are sharing and come to the reality. So this is what I was trying to do today. And of course, many things were left out of the lecture, but it was only a 45 minutes lecture. So, but I think it's important also to get that as a dimension. The second is the question about religions and people within the society. I'm not sure that it's as clear as that the people are rejecting some attitudes and not sometimes rejecting religions. You know, I was talking with Christopher Hitchens last week, and it's quite clear that he has a problem not with the people, but with religion. All the religions, by the way. And Islam is just the visible religion of the day. In the world of controversy, so he's attacking, and this is why he got the title "God is not great," as you know, opposed to Allahu Akbar. So God is the greatest. But the point for me is that I think we have to be serious about the discussion on religion today in our world, and not only to think it's only about people. Now, in the current atmosphere, for example, in Europe or in the States, it's quite clear that it's about the way some people are behaving. And I think that's right, that within the Muslim community, we need to be quite clear on the way we deal with this. So, you know, for example, but we have, and this is why we have a problem, because we were so many to say it's not Islamic, it's anti-Islamic. But as you know, we are living in the world of the media coverage today, and the media coverage has an intrinsic vicious circle. We cannot blame the journalists to cover only what is going wrong, and bad news is bad news mainly. So when 16, and I'm repeating this, 16 councils of Muslim scholars are condemning, you know, violent extremism and killing the innocent people, it's as if they are not talking. We don't hear them. And I would say that for our fellow citizens in this society, it's very important to hear the other voices, which are the mainstream voices in the Muslim community. And there are very, very tense debates within the Muslim communities and within the Muslim majority countries. So this also has to be listened to, and not only the more radical voices. But you said something that I think it's very important, that how could we consider the Muslims as with us if they themselves put they put themselves on the margin as outsiders. And I think that this is a fair point. It's really something which I have been repeating for the last 20 years. Stop two things. First, the victim mentality, and second, the minority feeling. You are Americans, you are part of the society. And I would like the new immigrants, the new Muslim Americans, to learn much more from the African American history for social justice, civil rights, and racial, commitment, because this is part of the American narrative. And by the way, this is where they are right by saying it's not a question, what are you talking about? Are you going to talk to the African American Muslims, telling them you have to integrate to be tolerated? We have been native, and sometimes we have been here before the white people. So we are not to be integrated. This is our country. But the problem has nothing to do with tolerating only the color. Is really to speak about justice and social justice and equal opportunities and the reality of discriminations in this country. So I would say that this is part of something that we have to do within the Muslim communities, which is put yourself in the mainstream, engage, and not only in time of crisis, and not only when it comes to Islam. And this is a very important one, is that we have this impression in many of our Western societies that the Muslims are visible only when we speak about Islam. Not when we speak about education, when we speak about arts, not when we speak about environment. And I think that this is where they have to normalize their presence by just being, the witnesses of to the message for people. This is what with their ethics and their consistency. So I take your point on that, and I think that there is something which is within the community sometimes real. Discrepancy or lack of commitment to these values. And the last question was about what the philosophers were saying. That's true that many of the philosophers were saying that there are levels. And by the way, in all the religious tradition, but in Islam, you have, the Sufi tradition was always putting hierarchy by saying there are some people that can reach a level of, nearness with God. And in philosophy, exactly the same. It's not because they are putting, this kind of hierarchy on the self-knowledge that it doesn't mean that for the ordinary citizens it's not possible to go towards a level of this self-knowledge. There can be, different interpretations on what an ordinary human being can achieve, but there is something which is said by all, which is important, a minimum of, critical thinking, of knowledge is open to every single human being, and this is why we are autonomous before God. So I would say that I don't buy, and this is something that we also have in the Greek tradition. If you listen to what Socrates is saying about the society, he is very elitist. He is very thinking that some will know and others won't. So what are we going to do with the people who cannot get that knowledge? And I think that from an Islamic perspective, but also from a democratic perspective, is to accept the fact that the minimum is possible for every single human being. So with this minimum, you can achieve something which has to do with human dignity and to protect your human dignity. This is what I would say. Now, some people could go beyond that. But, let me tell you one thing on that very quickly. And I am referring to this in the last book, and I was criticized by some people by just putting it the way it was. This is the discussion between the Mahatma Gandhi and Ambedkar in India. Because the lawyer who was chosen by Nehru to write the Indian constitution was very critical of Gandhi. Because Gandhi, in the name of this openness towards the world, he was calling the untouchable Harijan, the son of God. And he said, they are not the son of God. They are not. They are untouchable. They are marginalized. They are discriminated. Call them the way they are. Don't try and change the word to make it nice. Harijan is good for you, not for them. And there was a discussion here between someone trying to look at the objective, this is what we want, and the other looking at the reality. This is who they are in the system. So it's a very interesting discussion because at the end of the day, One was saying Hinduism per se with the castes is problematic because it's a system of power, so there is no real toleration. There is no real respect. It's just, no, in fact, there is toleration without respect. And he said, and America was saying, it's only when they will be considered as equal human beings, this is why I started with this, that they will get this respect. Let us talk about the concept of human being that you have. And this is why the answer of Gandhi was, no, I am at the same time a Christian, a Hindu, a Buddhist, a Jew, and a Muslim. I'm all that together. I'm beyond these divisions. And this is a very interesting discussion. And then at the end of the day, it's really the beginning of our discussion here. Tell me the concept of human being you have. I would know how you deal with toleration and respect. This is the starting point of the philosophical discussion. Sorry, I was too long. I will try to be.
So, from the perspective of your own personal understanding of Islam, should homosexuality be tolerated in an ideal society, Islamic or Western? Should homosexuals have the same legal and human rights like gay marriage? Thanks.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I was curious, when you asked Islam to go over its radical reform and revert to fundamentalism, you're referring to the text, to the interpretation of the Quran, which there are many versions of in Arabic and in other languages. I was wondering if you could extend a hand to the West, to Americans, in a perhaps an ideal translation that you find that we should all revert to, if there is one in your mind.
You mean of the Quran?
Of the Quran,
Okay.
an interpretation, because it's a big ask. So, what's your opinion on the matter?
I'm going to ask about the ulema, actually, and maybe return to the question of the first gentleman. I mean, the ideas here are incredibly well articulated. I mean, they leap off the page, what you're saying. But again, like you said, objective is different from reality, and so if I may ask about the reality, there's been an idea that the 21st century has 20th century has spent a lot of time bypassing the ulema. Perhaps there were revivalist movements or, popular Islamist movements that ignore a lot of the Islamic philosophy and intellectual history, fiqh and sharia, and the debates that happened for centuries. So Professor Ramadan, what do you think might happen in the 21st century? I know in some of your writings you mentioned combining the traditional sources of Quran and Sunnah with social sciences and other sciences and philosophies. But many of the prominent Muslim intellectuals today, like yourself, had to go perhaps to 2 universities to accomplish that. And I'm also thinking of Abdul Karim Soroush and Bakr al-Sadr or Ali Shariati. Many people had to get educated once in France and once perhaps at Al-Azhar or somewhere else. Do you think this might change and the ulema can carry some of these ideas forward? Or is it going to continue to be the popular movements? Thanks.
Thank you. Go ahead, we'll try to take, if you can be just quite,
Yes, I'll be very brief.
not like me, my
yes.
answer were too long. So,
What-
short question and I will deal with the answers.
Yes, thank you for your very informative and stimulating lecture. My question is to do with the Islamic Center planned for in New York. And my point is, while I understand the need to correctly call the Islamic Center an Islamic center, it seems to me that this is an attempt to sanitize Islam and allay fears over concerns of what Muslims might do in America. But it seems also that what it is doing, in fact, is that it's not challenging the fear and the intolerance towards Muslim in this country. So my point is, should it matter whether what will be built there is an Islamic center or a mosque? Should that even matter? Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
My question is on a clarification on what you mean when you say pluralism. I have no problems with the word diversity and everything else that's in your system, but pluralism bothers me quite a bit because coming from a Western theological philosophical perspective, modern per se, I know that this is not where you're going, but I just want to hear it from you. I know you're not running into an inverse sort of relativism, and I think that you're kind of speaking to that when you're saying tolerance is not enough, in a way. So what do you mean when you say pluralism, as in light of other types of pluralism that we've heard about, such as inverse relativism?
Yes?
When you discuss the factors that are very important to education, it was my impression that you were focusing on America and the Western world. And I'm wondering if you think that those factors are the same very important factors that should exist in education everywhere in the world, in all societies, and also in countries, specifically Afghanistan, where illiteracy rates are so high. Do you believe that that's a very urgent issue that has to do a lot with some of the problems we're having with our relationship with them? It's just my opinion is that illiteracy rates are becoming a more and more big problem, and I'm just wondering what your opinion is on that. Thank you.
Hi. I would like to talk to you about two facts that I saw on the internet before to come to the conference, because I'm in a business school and usually when we go for an interview we have to make some research. On November 22nd, 2003, you had a conversation with President Nicolas Sarkozy. Sorry for my accent, I'm from France. And he told you that you wrote a preface, an introduction to a book, who was saying that you're allowed to eat your wife if she cheats on you, if you don't injure her, and you wrote an introduction to that book who was saying that. And the second fact is that there is an imam called Abdelkader Bouziane, was expelled from France at the beginning of 2010 because he allowed to beat your wife if she cheats on you, and you were against the facts that France expelled him. So, Mr. Ramadan, my question doesn't really goes to you. My question goes to the chief of the department, and my question is: how can you invite somebody like Mr. Ramadan to talk about tolerance when he agrees with facts like that? Thank you.
Let me answer to your question first.
I'll just go back to my seat.
You were asking them a question before answer.
Yeah, there's 5 people before me who asked the question also, so I just go back to my seat and I come back.
That's right. Thank you. Yes, the last one, really, quickly.
Well, I'm from France too, and I wanted to ask you, obviously the United States and France have a very different view on the freedom of religion. As you said, we have a ban on the veil in public school. I think you could have had that we also have a ban on Christian cross and Jewish hat in public school, all religious symbol actually. I don't want to extend on the reason for this. And more generally, we have a kind of ban of religion in public space. And I wanted to ask you, do you think that this kind of view of a freedom of religion, which is very different from the US view on freedom of religion, is compatible with, can be reconciliated with the tolerance that you are advocating?
Okay.
Thank you.
So I will try to be as quick as possible. So about the first question about homosexuality. I have been asked this question many times, and if you go on my website, you will have texts and reference to this, but it's a long discussion. But let me just come to the point. I think from the Islamic tradition, it's quite clear, it's as if in the Christian and the Jewish tradition, even with the Dalai Lama, said that it's not understood by Islam as a permission or something which has to do with the divine project. So homosexuality per se is prohibited by Islam, and the traditional teachings are quite clear on this. Now, what I'm saying to the Muslims is, and to you is, don't expect the Muslims to say yes to this, but that what they have to show in their being citizens in the country, for example, in the United States of America, is to be able to say that we may not agree with the behavior, but we have to respect the human beings. And this is an attitude which is the starting point of the way we have to be with the people. What I'm doing as a believer, I'm not expecting the people to accept or to like it, but I'm asking them to respect the being who I am. And then when it comes to the rights in the society, I think that this should be consistent, that you cannot discriminate someone for his behavior and the way he is in his private life. This is of his or her business, and that has to be clear in our society. So it's quite clear that from a religious viewpoint, there is something which is quite clear on what the Muslims are saying, and this is quite a consensus in the Islamic tradition. But once again, recently I quoted that in a text that is on my website, that the Dalai Lama himself condemned homosexuality. But so what the religious and the moral ground is saying on that, it should be respected, and this is what is said by the great majority of the spiritualities and the religions. But we cannot go from this to something which is accepting discriminations on this basis, and we also have to respect the people for who they are, even though we don't agree with what they do and the way they behave. So this is the question. The second thing, quite important for the translation of the Quran, I wouldn't say that there is only one good translation that I refer to, because I think that there are many things that are, many works that have been done. For example, the translation of Muhammad Asad, who is, he is converted to Islam. He was a Jew, Leopold Weiss, he converted to Islam. He did a very good job in his translation with commentaries that are quite interesting. But Yusuf Ali could be also read at the same time. And I also sometimes refer to some translation coming from very literalists. Why? Because they are very close to the text in Arabic. So this with this could help you to get a better sense of what is said. So one translation isn't enough. When I'm working, for example, I wrote part of a translation of the last chapters of the Quran. I was referring to at least 12 translations in different language to get a sense, and then also, of course, to the Arabic language with all the different terms and terminologies and understanding. So is there a chance for the ulama might change the... I think that once again, in one book, Western Muslims and the Future of Islam, I was saying that the experience of the Muslims in the West will have a tremendous impact on the Muslims in Muslim majority countries. And that's true. I'm coming from the West. I travel around Muslim majority countries all over the world where I can go, and then it's heard that there is a dialogue, and I think that many scholars are now trained in many different ways, and I think that there is hope here that we might have a more constructive dialogue. So I myself went a very traditional way of being taught with, a one-to-one traditional taqlidi, as we say in Arabic, way of being taught, with ijazat, that the scholars giving you the authority in one specific field. I did this in 7 fields in order to get the knowledge, and then it's what you do out of it which can help you to move forward. And I think that what I'm meeting now and dealing with many scholars around the Muslim world that are getting a sense that it's not enough, that there is a crisis. It's far from being perfect, lots of problems, and we are still people having this sense that the only way to remain Muslim is to be protective. That's true. We have this kind of attitude with literalists. But we have other trends that are now building a sense of this critical commitment to Islam that I am supporting, and I think that this is where we have to work. About the Islamic Center in New York and what is taught should matter, yes and no. I would say, first, let us be clear. Once again, it's always, I have a methodology in the way I'm dealing with things, and the first is, okay, let us look at the principles. And the principles are clear. They cannot be in the United States of America Muslim-free zones, that we have to remove the Muslims from being there. This is not acceptable. This is not America. This cannot be, and you can tell me, oh, what is happening in Saudi Arabia? But Saudi Arabia are not our masters in the United States of America. We're not going to follow dictatorships just to prove our point that we are like them. I think that human rights are not a question of trade. They are a question of principles. So here we are dealing with principles, and it should be clear on that. Now, my position on this is, when it comes to the whole discussion and the comprehensive approach of what is happening in the United States of America, when we have more than 30 mosques that are prevented from being built in this country, it could be also quite wise for American Muslims to look at the whole picture and to understand that don't be driven by, emotional and focusing on only one thing. Symbols matter, but be careful not to be driven only by symbols and forgetting the reality. And the reality is there is discrimination towards Muslim mosques or Muslims and the construction of some mosques. And it's good to have a comprehensive approach. And I would say that, for example, I would like, I wrote a piece on the Washington Post. I was criticized by Muslims by saying, if it's possible to remove it from there, remove it. I say, what are you talking about? We have to struggle for our rights. I say, I never said you don't have to struggle for our rights. I'm saying struggle for our rights, but take into account the symbol and the collective sensitivity. And do something which could be more inclusive there. So I like the idea of having an Abrahamic center or community center which is open. Muslims taking the lead of something which is open to the other there to show we are not going to accept to be sidelined or discriminated elsewhere. And having people today in the United States of America supporting the fact that the community center should be built, that's very fine and very good. I was very happy to listen to what the mayor of New York said and others said. I think it's good to see crossing the board Christians, atheists, agnostics, Jews, and people coming and say, no, this is not America if you accept that. But we also have to ask them, don't be with us only with the symbols. Be with us with the reality. Be with us with all these centers, because to talk about this and to say, yes, I'm this, that's all fine. But this is not going to help us if we are not struggling at the local level to make our rights being respected. So this is my position. I know that some Muslims are not happy with this, but I'm just trying to get a comprehensive approach. Keith Ellison, the Muslim congressman, once said, to remove it from there, it would be as if asking Rosa Parks to just remove from the seat she was sitting in just because the people, this was the white system. So should she have, moved from the place? I say, I don't think that this is the same image, because my position is not where she was sitting, is to ask the question about the setting of the bus, the whole bus. Is to have a comprehensive approach of the bus. More importantly even is not only to speak about the bus, but asking myself, who is driving the bus? Who is driving the bus in which she the whole discussion that we have now. I really think that some people were pushing this and instrumentalizing the whole story for other intentions, with other agenda. And I think that on this we have to be clear also to look at the leadership in this community. There is a crisis of leadership, Islamic leadership in America, and by the way, also in all the Western countries. It's quite a deep discussion, but I don't have time to go beyond that. Very quickly about education. I might have given the impression that I was talking mainly about the West. No, I'm speaking crossing the board in Muslim majority countries. I would like the Muslims to reconcile themselves with philosophy, with the understanding of religions, to show curiosity towards Judaism, and to stop, reducing Judaism with the problems that we have with Israel. With Israel, we have a problem, yes, and not only the Muslims, by the way. It's an international problem that we have to solve in the name of equal rights and the dignity of Palestinians and the dignity of the people. That's fine. But Judaism is not only that. Judaism is a very rich tradition in philosophy, even in mysticism. So deep, so important, so interesting. In even the concept of freedom. I'm touching this in the book, and I was criticized by someone. How could you refer to that? I said, because it's rich, this understanding that the very moment you want what should be, that you get the highest level of freedom. This is coming from the Jewish tradition, which is so interesting. And I think that we have to study this. So my point is everywhere, and now the deep, the widespread level of illiteracy in Muslim majority countries is just showing that the governments, secular government or religious government, are not putting the money the way it should be in education. We have a problem. You know, the books in Arabic are not widespread. The people are not reading enough. We have a deep problem. It's a deep crisis. It's not only the political system that are problematic. It's really the way we deal with knowledge and science and creativity and arts. I think that all this is part of the challenges that I was talking about. You were referring to the discussion that I had with Sarkozy, and I cannot let you say this, asking the university, how could you invite someone who said that? And I want to respond to you. In 2003, yes, I had a discussion with Nicolas Sarkozy, and he was saying that I wrote the foreword of a book where the woman was saying that it's allowed in Islam to beat, for a man to beat his woman. I responded, but I think that you missed my response to this afterward, that the book in question, called Musulman tout simplement, is saying exactly the opposite. That in fact, there is one who was lying during the discussion. It was not me. It was the current president of France, who said, Tariq Ramadan, you wrote the foreword of a book where the woman is saying this. Go back to the book, and you will see that she's saying exactly the opposite. It's Islamically wrong to beat his wife. And by the way, if you read all what I have been saying for 25 years, all what I have been saying is exactly the opposite. So you are coming with a wrong quotation and asking the wrong question to the people who are inviting me. Now, about the woman who was expelled from France, you are misquoting my position. I said when he was expelled from France, I completely disagree with him, but it's wrong for government to send back people to the country because we don't agree with what they are saying, knowing that they are going to be tortured in the country they are sent. 2, the people who are sent back to Egypt, to any one of you who knows what is happening in Egypt, let me tell you a story, and this is, you are going to understand what I mean. I've been studying in Egypt for years. All my classical studies are coming from, were in Egypt. When I was to go to Egypt, I was to call the Swiss embassy to let the Swiss embassy, I'm arriving with this flight and please be at the airport. And they were always sending me someone. And once they didn't come, in fact, they come, but the Egyptian arrested me just before I went outside, and then they took me to Lazurli. Lazurli is where you treat the opponent to the Egyptian regime. And they just treat me like a criminal, but I had a Swiss passport, which is good. You will know why. That they treat me in a way, he was going to beat me, and the one who was close to him told him, no, he is a foreigner. So apparently I was an Egyptian, he was going to beat me. And you know what they did? They just took me in a room with, you know, the hands tied, and then they put me in the room, and they come with an Egyptian. And they beat the Egyptian in front of me to show me how we treat opponents in this country. I was protected by my Swiss passport, and they went to show me. I left after 17 hours saying, I will never forget that. I will never forget how this country is treating opponents. So when the president of France, disagreeing with an imam, is sending him back to Egypt, knowing the way we are going to treat, I say, if you don't agree with him, and I don't agree with him, you don't send back the people to countries where we torture. This is not right. This is not the way democracy is. I don't know if you agree with me, and if you agree with me, you will pay tribute to the people to invite me here to say it. So, the last point about France and the freedom of France, I don't think, and this will be the last point for me, is you are saying that freedom of religion in France is different from freedom of religion in this country. Of course, there are differences, and these are different traditions. But let us be serious about that. You are saying that the law that was enforced in the 15th March 2004 was in fact against all the religious symbols. You are right. In theory, we are talking with all the religious symbols. But if you read the things, it's just laughable. Because it's, how should the cross be to be prevented from being worn by someone. It's the visible religious symbols. So we were speaking about the kippah, we were speaking about, but all the people understood that in fact it was targeting the headscarf. And this is it. This is why around the world, when we speak about this law, you know, the cross was not really banned if it can be invisible, if it's a small one. So the law is really about the two visible religious symbols. And the two visible religious symbols are mainly, and the law is enforced against the headscarf mainly. And why at that point? Why now coming with this law? It's only because we have a more visible Muslim presence. If not, why the law before? Why now? Because we are talking about Islam. So all this business about, oh no, it's for all the religions, that's fine, but in theory it's right, in practice it's against the headscarf, and we know that. The second point that I want to make is, that's not true just to say France has a specific take on that. That's not true. Why? Because till 2004, if you relied on the law, we had, for example, in 1989, the State Council saying there is no contradiction between the headscarf and the secular laïc system. So the French had to change the law to make it something which is different from the concept of freedom of expression or religious freedom. So I'm against this law. I think it's not the right way to treat differences and dresses. I think that my position is always clear. It's against Islam to impose onto a woman to wear the headscarf. No imposition. If she doesn't want, she should be allowed. This is why I'm clear against what was done by Saudi Arabia or Iran by imposing the headscarf. I think it's the wrong policy. This is wrong. No compulsion on that. But I'm saying exactly the same to France. It's wrong to impose onto a woman to take it off in the name of human rights. Let the people decide for themselves. So when you say, oh, it's a different interpretation of freedom of religion, I think, no, it's just now that you have politicians and the discussion in France is just coming to a point where we are using this as a way of targeting this Muslim presence perceived as a danger in France. And this is where you gain the next elections. You know, we have elections coming in France. It's exactly the same as here. Do you think that all these controversies is not connected to the next elections in the United States of America? That the neocons are not going to attract voters by doing this? Of course they are doing this. It's exactly the same in France. Islam is becoming the ping-pong ball between parties to know who is going to target them the more to get voters. It's populism. And you have today, I'm sorry to tell you, a president in France. He's very close to populism in the way he treats this question. And being able, let me end with this, being able to say, and this is why it's dangerous, we have to be cautious and aware of all these problems, and especially in the United States of America, someone who is now saying there is two status of citizenship. If now you are a new citizen and you are violent against a policeman or authorities, you can be, you can see your citizenship being questioned and removed from you. And what's that? Which kind of citizenship are we talking about? So there are citizens, more citizens than others, and new citizens are not really citizens, and they have to prove that they are really citizens, is the end of the reality of this society. And I think that this is a very important point. But I'm very sorry because I'm taking too much time, but there is one question that I missed that I don't want to miss and I don't want to neglect, which is this discussion about pluralism. Because I think that out of what I was saying, my discussion on pluralism is not this kind of reverse pluralism or relativism. I'm not talking about that. I'm using the concept of pluralism and pluralistic in a way which has to do with an objective reality. If today you speak about multiculturalism, you have people saying multiculturalism is failing, it's a wrong model. I'm just going to pluralism by saying this is an objective factor. We live in pluralistic societies with diversity, with diverse religious affiliations or backgrounds and culture. Pluralism is just this reality. It's not an ideology, it's just a description of the reality of this diversity in our society. Now,
a philosophy of pluralism is how, from where we are, we get a sense of who we are and respecting who we are not. So how do we deal with pluralistic societies based on understanding, knowledge, and mutual respect? This is what I'm trying to do. So I'm not translating pluralism into an ideological take by saying, you know, it's relativism. If you read the text from within the Muslim tradition, as well as this book on the quest of meaning, you will see that I'm not advocating at all anything which is close to relativism. I think that this is not what I'm trying to do. Thank you.